Okay, so this is a run through of June 2010 F582 paper. The first question is identify 3 government macroeconomic policy objectives. It's worth 3 marks. We've got inflation being stable, or price stability is another way of saying that, with a target of 2%. That applies to the UK. The key information that would be looked for is inflation at a stable level. Low unemployment at around 5 to 7%. Another way of saying that would be full employment. To achieve economic growth, we want what the policy objective for economic growth is. So up until this point, yes, 1 and 1, but we want a description of what economic growth should be. So either stable economic growth would be a better way of getting the mark there. The next question says, describe the changes in Australia's interest and inflation rate between 2008 and 2009. This is the graph that was in the case study. As it's described change, and for 3 marks, you're kind of looking for 3 key changes across the graph. You've got an increase in interest, you've got a fall in the inflation rate, and then an increase. And you've always got the relationship that the interest rate is greater than the inflation rate. The answer that is given says the inflation rate has risen every year since 2005. So we've got 1 mark there. Whereas the inflation rate dipped from 2005 to 6 and has risen since to 4%. Okay. The other key mark is that difference between the two. You do have the dip here as well, so that would be worth 3 marks there. The next question is comment on the effectiveness of increasing the rate of interest to reduce inflation. As it's a comment question, you're looking at how increasing the rate of interest rate would reduce inflation, and then why maybe increasing the rate of interest would not reduce inflation. And essentially you're looking at a graph that would reduce aggregate demand within the economy and reduce the rate of inflation. The answer here says the rate of interest symbolises how much as a percentage people gain from saving money or how much they have to pay for lending money. Another way to say that would be the cost of borrowing, but we'll find up until this point. An increase in the rate of interest discourages people from taking out loans and encourages savings as they will gain a higher rate of return. So we've got kind of a bit of AO1 at the start there, and now a bit of AO2 to say what the effects would be. This will affect aggregate demand as people are more likely to save, and therefore the consumer expenditure will fall. So we've got a fall in C, there's an AO3, shifting AD to the left, fall in AD, causing a fall in price and a fall in real GDP. Bit of accuracy there. Price level is key. This will keep inflation lower as the price of products are falling. Not necessarily falling, but let's say the rate of inflation slows, because we're just talking about reducing inflation, not necessarily going into deflation. However, the effectiveness of this depends upon what part of the aggregate supply curve takes place. If the fall in AD occurs on the elastic part of the supply curve, then no price fall, and this won't affect inflation at all. So what this part is referring to, and it may help to draw the graph to really show this, is that if aggregate demand is falling across this part, then the price level will stay the same. I think an additional part here for these marks would be to talk about why. So maybe during a recession, it's likely that there'll be lots of spare capacity. And this is what will lead to the aggregate demand starting at a low level. Again, price level fall. So just for accuracy, and this won't affect inflation. If people believe that the increase in the rate of interest is short-term, then spending patterns are likely to be affected, and people will take out loans with higher interest rates as they believe it will fall soon, or because they need the product such as food and a house, and therefore will take out the loans no matter the cost. So there's two good EO4 points there. I think what we're looking at is almost full marks for this question. I think we'd probably get 5 out of 6 just for a couple of those accuracy points. The next question is saying explain how a high value currency can result in a country having a trade deficit. The other way of saying a high value currency would be a strengthening or a stronger exchange rate. So 4 marks here. Explain question. The answer says a strong pound makes the pound more valuable to other foreign currencies, and therefore means that other countries will have to pay more for domestic goods. This sentence, a strong pound makes the pound more valuable. I think another way to say that, or a better way, is to increases the purchasing power of the pound in international markets. This makes other countries will have to pay more for domestic goods, so it's highlighting that foreign economies will pay more. Therefore, due to the higher prices, exports will see a decrease in the amount demanded. EO2, and imports become relatively cheaper to what they once were. This results in the amount of imports demanded increasing. Again, EO2. This results in the trade deficit as more being imported, with more money leaving the economy compared to the amount being exported and money coming in. This last part is not quite specifically saying what a trade deficit is. You almost need the definition of this, that it's the value of imports being greater than the value of exports. Okay. Within that, it kind of says that, but it's not really specific. It just says that there is the amount of imports has increased the amount of exports, but it's the value which leads to the trade deficit. So I think 3 out of 4 for that one. Again, just a little bit of accuracy on the question. The next question says, using information in the case study, draw an aggregate demand and supply diagram to illustrate the state of the Australian economy in 2008. The key part from the case study that refers to this, it says, the Australian government, like other governments, seek to promote economic growth because of the benefits that can be gained. The Australian growth rate in 2008 was 2.7%. So you know the economy was growing. Here it says aggregate demand shifts to the right, intersecting aggregate supply at the point which it turns inelastic, real GDP and price level labelled on the axis. Well, it hasn't been drawn. The diagram could have been just short-term economic growth, which is kind of described here with some demand pull inflation, P1 from P. Remember that the axes are Y and Y1. Don't forget to label real GDP and price level here, and long run aggregate supply on the graph there. The next question is analyse how the proposed change in Australia's income tax rates would be expected to influence aggregate demand. The change in the case study is talking about a cut in income taxes, so how that would affect aggregate demand, and it's worth 6 marks. So at least 4 or 5 steps in explaining the effect on the market. So it starts a cut in income tax means people are more likely to have a higher disposable income as less money is taken off them. So that higher disposable income is worth 1 mark. This means that they are likely to spend their money on purchasing more goods and services, which will affect aggregate demand. This will shift it to the right, increasing the price and real GDP. Well, it's just asking about aggregate demand, so this part isn't relevant. You don't need to analyse the price level of real GDP. This, however, may not be the case, as the government are likely to receive less money through income tax. Okay, this is just an analysis question, so we don't need EO4. So this whole section at the bottom here is an evaluation. It's why it might not happen. So this will be a NAQ, not answering the question. So we've really only got 2 steps at the top here for those 6 marks. What we would need to look at to get 6 marks for this is 2 different parts of aggregate demand around the consumption part of this, as well as potentially investment. And then both of those will equal a rise in aggregate demand. So if we have lower income tax, it's right that there's more disposable income, and that there would be more spending. A good way to link into this would be to talk about normal and luxury goods. So there'll be an increase in those income responsive goods as people get to keep more of their money, and then as consumer spending rises on goods and services, the consumption part of AD will rise. So there isn't a mention of consumption up here. It's key that you mention the part of aggregate demand. That would give the 3rd mark within that first part. Then analyse it from a business point of view as well. So the increase in demand or the increase in consumption will cause an increase in sales of goods and services. This will mean that businesses increase their output, which will increase their retained profit, and that will lead to an increase in private sector investment as well. So that would be another 2 ways of getting those marks. As it is with the NAQ, we're looking at 2 out of 6 for that question. The next question says, state and explain 2 economic costs of inflation. The first economic cost mentioned here, and again 6 marks, so 3 marks for each, is an increase in the inflation rates will cause businesses to have to change the price of their product in line with the inflation rate. This will cause added extra cost to the business, which may be passed on to the consumer and lead to lower profits. What's missing from this is the key term. So that is either administration costs or menu costs. So changing the price of product in line with inflation, added cost of goods being passed on to the consumer. I think probably more likely to be menu costs from the definition that's given there, but that would have been AO1, then that would have been AO2, and then the last point would have been AO3. So it's missing kind of a key term there to link those parts to. So 2 out of 3 for the first part. The second part, higher inflation rate will always cause a decrease in international competitiveness. So we've got a point there, AO1. Higher prices will lead to the amount of exports demanded decreasing as they're relatively cheaper somewhere else. AO2, this could lead to a current account and trade deficit. AO3. So the second part has that kind of point, then the evidence, then the explaining. So overall, 5 out of 6 for that answer. The next part of the paper, there is a comment question. So 2-sided, on whether figure 2 supports the view that higher inflation, so an increase in inflation, is associated with lower unemployment. So does high inflation or rising inflation lead to unemployment, or does low unemployment lead to higher inflation? So it's a relationship question. So you've got a data table here, which is in different countries, the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. And if inflation is high and unemployment is low, then you've got inflation high, unemployment low. So you'd be somewhere around here. If unemployment was high, inflation would be low. So high unemployment here, low inflation there. So the relationship they are talking about is, does figure 2 just support that view? So you've got 3 countries, Singapore, USA and Australia, that support that view. You've got Brazil and Switzerland that don't. Now, in the answer itself that's given, it says figure 2 doesn't support the view that high inflation is associated with low employment. So there is a judgment made, which you would have to do for this table, but it says it appears to show the opposite, with a lower inflation rate leading to a lower unemployment rate. So low inflation, low unemployment, Switzerland, so that's kind of saying no. So we've got an example there of AO2. We do have a judgment there. as the inflation rate rises, so does the unemployment rate. However, there is clearly an anomaly in the form of Singapore, which has higher inflation than anyone else. Now, Singapore actually follows the trend in that it has high inflation and low unemployment. So this part here where it's talking about Singapore is not correct in line with the question. So Singapore, or this part here, isn't going to generate any marks. So you've got, what this should be is the side that agrees with that. So the side that doesn't agree, and Brazil would be the other one. So there'd be 1 mark around Brazil, 1 mark about Switzerland, 1 mark around describing the relationship that Singapore, the US and Australia all kind of follow within that. When you come into the evaluation as well, you've got 2 key things to say. One of them, if you're asking whether inflation is associated with low unemployment, that's implying in all cases. What you have here is just 5 countries. So does that represent every country in the world? And you've only got 1 year, which is 2008. So there's 2 extra bits of evaluation around those 2 points as well. So as it currently is, it's maybe 3 or 2 out of 6. The next example answer is state and explain 2 supply side policies for 4 marks. So 1 supply side policy identified as education, AO1. This would mean that people would have the right skills, so when they get the job they're trained appropriately. This will mean that they can produce more or high quality goods, which will shift aggregate supply. This is kind of a too vague or TV bit of feedback. There's words that are missing in here, like productivity, productive potential, or the quality and quantity of factors of production. So with education, the skills part, which is mentioned here, is about improving the quality of the labour factor of production. And this will then allow an increase in productivity, and that allows the increase in long run aggregate supply, which is a lot for 4 marks, but you've probably got 3 marks of information within that. Another supply side policy would be deregulation, again AO1, or the removal of barriers. This would mean that it would be simpler to enter the market and set up a business. With more businesses, the increase in productive potential and capacity of the economy. Now it does mention those keywords there, but there's a link lacking between the effect and why that would happen. The key steps within that one are the reduction in production costs, the increase in profitability or retained profit, therefore the increase in investment in physical capital or capital goods. And this is what increases the productive potential and therefore long run aggregate supply. Again, more steps than would be needed for a 4 mark question, but it makes sure that the key link is there between the 2 things. So there's definitely 2 marks out of 4 here. There may be a benefit of the doubt mark because productive potential is written there, that an examiner may give this. Okay, the last mark, the big mark question on this paper is quite a common question, which is discuss the extent to which economic growth may benefit an economy. So as a discuss question, it means that there is 2 sides to this, the reasons why economic growth is beneficial to an economy and why it might not be. The definition here, economic growth in the long term is an increase in the productive capacity of an economy, in the short term by an increase in real GDP. So we've got a nice accurate definition there. We've got some AO1 marks there. Economic growth rate currently stands about 0.6, with higher economic growth rates being seen in economically developing countries. That's a nice bit of AO2, applying it to developed and developing economies. A rise in economic growth can therefore have many benefits and costs to consumers, businesses and the government. Whereas that sentence doesn't get any marks, it does frame how the structure of the essay may continue. A rise in the productive capacity